Thank you, Jake. So hi everybody, I'm Glenn Anderson and I'm a farmer basically, but I'm one of the landowners on the Wendling Beck, and it's a collaborative project with a whole bunch of other landowners and NGOs, and trying to do things a little bit differently. So the Wendling Beck is the name of the river that flows through the project area. Tiny little chalk stream, part of the Wensum, which obviously then ends up as part of the Yare, which is presumably the bit that I came past. I was looking at the maps on the way here and the floodplains and what have you. And really just trying to look at how we can do things a little bit differently with the land, and I'll come on and explain a little bit about that. So first of all, can you all see all right there? I'm not in your way or anything. Who are we? Oh, sorry, where are we? So we're bang in the middle of Norfolk. So if you drew a circle around Norfolk, I'm told that the stone that marks the true centre of Norfolk is actually within the project area. So we really are bang central. And the map on the left-hand side actually shows the strategic green infrastructure corridors for Breckland. So that map is of Breckland, and you can see that the purple veins on there tend to follow the river corridors. But we had no idea because we'd just been farmers merrily carrying along farming for the last sort of couple of decades, not really appreciating where we sat and where we sat within the wider context of the landscape. But as we've sort of gone on this journey with the project, we've started to understand about a lot more about the natural capital of the land and where we sit in the bigger scheme of things. And you can see the dark red lines on that left-hand map are actually the Norfolk trails as well. And again, completely oblivious, but we actually have two of the Norfolk trails. So the Nar Valley Way, which runs up to King's Lynn, and the Wensum Way, which runs across to Norwich, actually intersect within the project area, which again, you know, we're the landowners where that intersects, but had absolutely no idea that that happened. And Pedder's Way is the big long one along there. And we've actually created a new Norfolk Trail as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee funding, which is the Wendling Way, which is named after the project, and that actually intersects to those other ones as well, and actually connects Dereham Marketplace now to a couple of the surrounding villages. So really, as we've gone on this journey, our focus has shifted a little bit. So I think we'd be honest to say that this was partly financially motivated originally. We were really quite worried about basic payment scheme, so the subsidy regime of the cap, which was going to go after we came out of the EU. We're on super light land where we are, just north of Dereham. Really struggle with drought, and obviously climate change is another huge challenge. So we were kind of looking at how we could sort of repurpose the farming business and try and not lose a ton of money in the process, and that kind of led us down this route of working with nature and actually trying to monetize that as part of the business model, and then kind of growing that concept. So really looking at scale. So if you go back to 2010 and Making Space for Nature report, which Jake will be familiar with, a guy called John Lawton, this principle of bigger, better, more enjoined, which some of you will probably be aware of, but really trying to look at how we can kind of come together to deliver something better than the sum of the parts by collaborating with other landowners. So it's quite a big collaboration. There's various organisations that are, you know, this is quite an old slide, but we've moved on a little bit as we've gone through this process. So the project is now in its 4th year. You'll probably see John Jones on there, who's Norfolk County Council, has actually left. So he retired just a few weeks ago and has been replaced by a lady called Wendy Brooks, who's from the Environment Agency. So this is, you know, even within our kind of tenure, we've seen people come and go, but we've had some amazing people support the project since its inception. But really it's about the 4 landowners are kind of key to this. So they own about 95% of the land within the project area. And we also have Norfolk Wildlife Trust and Norfolk County Council as minority landowners in the project as well. So when we started this, we were going out and really just trying to express what we were trying to achieve, and have brought some amazing organisations in as part of that journey. So Sophie up here is from an organisation called the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, big American NGO with a principal mission in life, which is to preserve all of the land and water upon which life exists. And again, quite a big organisation, about $1.5 billion organisation taking philanthropic donations from high net worth individuals, mainly in the US, but now with a kind of an international focus. And there are 2 projects in the UK at the moment, so we are one of them on the Wendling Beck, and the other is the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme, so both of those located in Norfolk. And that other project is really looking at freshwater resilience and freshwater security. So as we move towards a future with climate change, I think Norfolk is described as a dry county within a dry region. So it's really, we have a huge amount of pressure coming, and the Broads are experiencing that at the moment with the cessation of abstraction licenses. There's challenges for farmers, and we really need to start to think about how we do things differently. And TNC really did give us a leg up in the start of this project. They obviously saw something in us. I don't know what it was, but they invested a little bit of money and quite a lot of time and resource in trying to help the project get off the ground. And as part of that process, I've worked with all of these other organisations as well. So Anglian Water are a key partner in the project as well. Obviously got their own share of challenges within the freshwater environment, and they wear a couple of hats. They're a resource for us, particularly in terms of mapping and modelling and things like that, but they're also a buyer of what we call environmental credits, and I'll come on to explain a bit about that, but that's how we're looking at kind of trying to monetise this project. And then we have organisations like the Rivers Trust and FWAG locally. I'm actually a director and trustee of Norfolk FWAG as well, working closely with those guys, and then a whole heap of specialists, including lawyers and ecologists, and the University of East Anglia, who have been also a phenomenal support for us. So I think we have 5 PhDs working on the project at the moment, and a whole heap of master's students, which is great because they're a resource for us, and they don't cost us any money either. So they've been really great in terms of collecting data and helping with some of the baseline information. So why are we doing this? Which is a question I frequently ask myself. But it's really about trying to look at land use a little bit differently. And our philosophy is that climate change and biodiversity loss actually are really the single biggest threats to food security. So as we think about being able to feed ourselves as a nation, we can't do that in drought. We can't do that with we've had we seem to get the hottest month, the hottest year, the wettest month, the wettest year, and as a farmer we're out there in those elements trying to cope with that, and it's really quite easy to lose money, but also that's an existential threat to all of our societies in terms of food security as well. So how do we reset that balance? We have a net zero challenge. We know that the government is committed, in theory, to net zero, and actually the land sector and farming has a huge role to play in that, because it's one of the only industries that we can actually start to sequester carbon and reset the balance in terms of supporting biodiversity as well. We also have massive water security challenges, as I just explained. We're on super light land. We really suffer particularly with drought, and we can see that those abstraction licenses being reduced over time, and that's a real challenge for us. It's not, you can't go on just trying to sweat the asset in terms of production and just hoping that climate change is going to go away. We really have to try and reset that balance, and farming has a huge carbon and pollution footprint within the wider environment, but it's also a huge opportunity for redressing that as well. Subsidies going, as I mentioned, we see subsidies really were the kind of the mechanism that underwrote the risk of production. So they're the things that says, well, we've just lost some money on the farm this year, but we're still going to grow something next year. Without those in place, that becomes unsustainable. And obviously subsidies are now moving across to environmental land management, which is the new environmentally linked subsidised regime that the government's looking at, and I can come on and explain a little bit about that in a minute as well. And really agri-environment, so agri-environment, which was the the piece that some people will be familiar with, where you see the kind of the wild bird strips and plots, and some cultivated margins and flower margins and things like that, wasn't particularly strategic. So where we were already talking to our neighbouring landowners, we could never really join up that approach. It always meant that somebody was going to miss out with a year's funding or something because we couldn't get any of the scheme dates to align, and it just wasn't really working strategically with nature. It was, don't get me wrong, it does its fair share and it does its bit, but it doesn't really sort of look at that from a strategic nature perspective. And then we see these opportunities coming through within what we call private markets. So we have something called biodiversity net gain, which you might have read a bit about in the papers, but that came through as part of the Environment Act that was enacted in 2021. That's mandatory from January, so the guidance is just coming out on that now. You'll start to see more and more about that written in the paper. And the principle of BNG is that as a developer, if you're losing habitat, which most developers do as part of any kind of development, whether it's housing or infrastructure or whatever it is, then generally there's an uplift in the value of that land as part of that development, so that loss of habitat should at least be reset. So, habitat is a benefit for wider society. If they're going to make a financial gain from ticking the box for getting planning permission, then the least they can do is actually reset the habitat that they're losing, which belongs to wider society as part of that process. But actually more than that, they actually now need to provide a minimum of a 10% net gain as well. So wherever we're losing nature, we're not just halting the decline in biodiversity loss, but we're starting to provide a net gain. We also have things like nutrient neutrality, which again you might have read bits about. It's been on the news as well, which is this principle of the rivers are suffering. We know that the Wensum is probably one of the best examples of that anywhere in the world, suffering from over nutrification. And as you start to increase development, that has an adverse impact on those freshwater systems, and nutrient neutrality tries to reset that balance. So it's trying to create development which is nutrient neutral. It hasn't been rolled out particularly well. It's been quite lumpy. It came as a kind of a guillotine effect to the developers, and we're only just getting to the point where some of the interventions are being realised, which is allowing nutrient credits to be formed, which developers are able to buy, which enables them to then carry on building. So that's been a bit of a lumpy process, but this starts to create a bit of a market that actually as landowners we can start to use, and it might be a farming business that's just looking for a bit of diversification, or it could be in the case of Wendling Beck, something much bigger and much more scalable. We still want to grow food. We understand that food security is an issue. We need to continue that story, but we can do it in a much more sustainable manner. So within the project, we will transition most of the arable out of production, but as we do that with the habitats that we're creating, we'll need managing through livestock. We'll bring livestock in, which will go back into the food chain. We're looking at a farm shop and cafe, and we have some blackcurrants which are grown for Suntory, which ultimately go into Ribena, and we're transitioning them to a regenerative system. So this principle of working with the soils to have less dependence on pesticides and synthetics, and actually kind of work with nature to grow those products. And we think we can actually do probably better than farming that land, because again we're on grade 3 land. It's not terribly profitable at the moment. If we've got the opportunity to work with nature and almost grow nature and actually sell that to the private sector, then that's an opportunity for us to do that. And that then delivers multiple kind of public goods, but also government targets. So we have net zero, we have the 25-year environment plan, we have 30 by 30, which is a principle of protecting 30% of water and land by 2030. And these are commitments that the government have, and we can actually help achieve some of those targets as part of that process. So we're kind of, it's not perfect, but we're certainly working in the right direction. So what are we doing? So this is a map of the project area about 3 years ago, and you can see this was probably taken at quite a dry time, but effectively you've got the river corridor coming down the middle, which is the green stripe, and then most of the land either side is been in arable. And if you look at the map in the top left-hand corner, the orange on there, that's a UK HAB map, which is the methodology that we use to measure the type of habitat on the ground. The orange is actually arable on there, so you can see that most of the project area has actually been in quite intensive arable for probably the last 150 years. And as we transition away from that, it becomes a little bit wilder. It's not a rewilding project, it's a managed conservation project, because we're setting out to deliver specific habitats to a specific condition within a specific amount of time. We have to do that because we have to meet the metrics that are part of this process. But if you look at the map in the top left-hand corner again, I just flick back, we've gone from nearly all arable to a hodgepodge of different colours, including quite a lot of yellow in there. And the yellow on that map is actually lowland meadow. So lowland meadow is a high distinctiveness, high priority habitat type, of which we've lost about 99% in the UK. And I think Wendling, not sure I'm actually accurate in this fact, but I think Wendling will probably be one of the biggest blocks of lowland meadow anywhere in the country, assuming that we get to deliver it to that condition, which is a challenge in itself. But you can see this map, we're starting to link the woodland corridors, we're starting to create areas of scrub and heathland, lowland meadow, and it's just a much more kind of natural environment, and it's delivered at scale. So you've got these mosaic of different habitats delivered at a much bigger scale. And that green stripe, which is still down the middle, is much more protected. So there's 3 triple SIs in that area at the moment, and the rest of the landscape starts working much harder to actually preserve and to enhance those sites of special scientific interest. So this is just a concept map of what we'll be delivering. There's quite a lot going on in there. Just a few features to point out. You can see down here, the river here runs actually south to north, but we have the Anglian Water water recycling centre. We're not allowed to say sewage works anymore. And this is kind of Dereham town centre down here, which most of you will be aware of. So that water recycling centre serves about 26,000 people, and it has its fair share of issues. It's just going through some upgrades, but one of the biggest challenges it's got is actually flooding. So there are 2 water courses here. There's the Dereham stream, which comes in from this way, and the Wendling Beck, which obviously flows through the project but starts down in the south here, and they converge right outside the front door of the works, and they cause problems every time we have these periods of flood. And it used to flood once every 5 to 10 years. I think it now floods about 10 times a year. It's taking quite a lot of urban runoff in there as well, so you're getting these kind of high peaks of water coming through, and that's a massive challenge to Anglian Water. And ultimately is a problem for the watercourse as well. So we're looking at remeandering and putting the river back on its original course, reconnecting these streams past the works further up the floodplain and further into the watercourse. And actually the modelling shows that we'll take away about 90% of that flooding. And then we can use the existing channel, and we can put plants in there, reeds, etc., to take the discharge from the works and actually polish that cleaned water before it then re-enters the watercourse. And that will enable us to remove some nutrients in the process, which is part of that nutrient neutrality thing that I mentioned, enables us potentially to sell some credits to developers. And actually all of this habitat that's going on in here, so we're restoring 2 heathlands that have been lost. We know we're sort of working with historic maps, trying to understand what used to be there, kind of going back to history and resetting that landscape to some extent, and trying to work with nature as opposed against it, because we've been working against it for quite a long time with farming, and it hasn't worked particularly well. So we can actually start to work with it to reset the balance in some of these habitat types, and that enables us to then sell the uplift in that biodiversity again back to developers, and actually use that almost like our crop from farming, if you will. There's a couple of other things on here, so you can see the farm shop and cafe. The Gresson Hall Museum is really important to us as well. So I mentioned that Norfolk County Council were a partner in the project. Their land holding within there is Gresson Hall Museum. Its actual proper name is Gresson Hall Farm and Workhouse Museum of Norfolk Life, which is a not terribly catchy title. But we know it as Gresson Hall Museum. Now that has about 60 to 80,000 visitors a year, but it also has about 15,000 school children coming through there. So as we're thinking about how we use this project to kind of communicate both peer-to-peer with other landowners, explain what we're doing and create models that other people can replicate, but we can also talk to the public about this and enable a kind of an education piece to this as well. And the best place to start on that is with the school children. But as a project, we're spinning multiple plates at the moment. It's quite a lot going on. And having busloads of school children coming in every day is a bit of a liability for us. So the council do that really well, but we can offer them the project area to be able to do that. That extends that experience that the museum's got. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but there's a little working Victorian model farm there as well, where they still plough with the Suffolk Punch horses and use kind of rural skills and rural crafts. And it's almost like a look back in history of that historical baseline of farming in a Norfolk context. We can start to change that narrative a bit and also weave in the journey to net zero, the future of farming, the future of conservation, and start to educate the kids on, where their food is coming from, but also how we treat nature and why that's really important within the wider context of society. I'll just get one other point on here. There's also a little project with John Innes Centre, which is looking at a nursery for disease-resistant ash and elm trees, and that they get planted out this year. So by 2029, we should have a seed bank of disease-resistant ash, which we can then start to plant out in the wider landscape and start to try and overcome cholera. So that's using John Innes's expertise as plant breeders to overcome those diseases through accelerating natural selection. So that's what they do best. That's already about 8 years old, that project, and the saplings that they've got now, they're quite happy with. They're happy with the resistance genes within there. Involves some complex sort of DNA analysis and things like that. But we will enable them to be able to do that as well. So that area's just been deer fenced. And as we go on, we expect sort of multiple little spin-off projects with this as well. The big stripe on here across the middle is actually the Vattenfall Vanguard cable corridor. So this is an offshore wind farm. And again, rather than Vattenfall come in, they dig the trenches, they put conduits in, they pull cables, and then they reinstate it all, and it kind of goes back to what it was. We knew this was coming, but we didn't know the timing on it. As it turns out, they've just started in the last few weeks on the ground, and we were trying to kind of design this project around them, and we felt the best way to do that was actually to actually make it a feature within the design of the project. So this will become this 4 kilometre long kind of green corridor through the project. It gets fenced either side. We'll plant hedges which will allow to grow tall and kind of tumble out over time. And it's 50 metres wide. We'll put species-rich grass down the middle. But that also becomes our kind of superhighway for moving livestock across the project as well. So as we need to move stock around rather than trying to get them in trailers and cross rivers and roads and things like that, we'll reinstate the fords in the river. We'll be able to move the livestock through this kind of drove. It's almost like a traditional sort of droving route through the project as well. So lots of opportunities. We haven't got all of the answers. I'm sure this will continue to evolve as we get there. But actually about probably 10 to 15% of this has already been delivered on the ground. So we have done some spading groundworks. And as I say, the Vattenfall guys are now on the ground. I've just literally before I came here sent them the fencing specification for doing this, and it's all getting quite exciting because it's all very good, well, talking about this, but really it's all the proof is in the pudding, and that's the important bit. So the technical bit of this and the boring bit, if you like, is how we actually do this legally and contractually and everything else. So we have all of these kind of potential revenue streams. So Carbon potentially in there. We are measuring carbon. We're working with the UEA on soil carbon. We're measuring above ground carbon using some clever AI machine learning technology to do that. We don't expect really to be able to trade carbon, but it could potentially be a revenue stream in the future. We're looking at natural flood management with that Angling Water flood scheme. Nutrient neutrality at the moment, there's a big market for that. We're just getting to the point where we can deliver some of those interventions. Biodiversity net gain will form quite a big part of our market, and then we've still got the opportunity around Elm, if we need it as a kind of a safety net, to be able to deliver this through some kind of subsidies. We're hoping that we don't need that we can do it through this. And then there's this other market out there, which is a voluntary market at the moment, but is becoming more compliance-led, which is this principle of environmental social governance, or CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, where organisations are starting to come under pressure to offset their environmental footprint. And again, one of the ways that they can do that once they've got their own house in order is to buy offsets from projects like this. And we're sort of seeing that market evolve at a global level now as well. And there's some policies that are coming through on the international stage, which is starting to drive that as well. So it's really a changing landscape for us. We're learning as we go. As I say, 4 years ago, we were just farmers and we didn't know anything about any of this. So it's been quite a steep learning curve. To be able to do this, we've had to create a new company. So we've called this Wendling Beck Opco, which is a limited liability partnership, and that's brought those 4 landowners together into one sort of single entity, and that will enable us to take this revenue potentially from these ecosystem services, but it also will form a company which can deliver this project over the long term, because these agreements are really long term. So biodiversity net gain is 30 years, nutrient neutrality is 80 to 125 years. Now that's quite a long time in anyone's book, but certainly as we're thinking about land changes hands, people come, people go, we need an entity there that will actually last in perpetuity, ideally, that you can actually always have some money in the pot to be able to manage and maintain these habitats. So the idea is that revenue that comes in doesn't immediately go to the landowners, it stays in this kind of central trust fund, and that allows a kind of a gentle income stream back to the landowners, but always with this central pot to make sure that there's enough money in the pot at the end of 30 years to still manage the project. And we also have inflation in this, and when we started this project, I think we were based in inflation on 0.5% or something like that, and we're now at, we've been up to 10, we're now down to 6 or whatever it is. So that's been quite a challenge as well, and when we're looking into the future, we haven't got a clue what it looks like, if we're honest. So yeah, I mean, one of our advisors has got this expression: when we talk about nutrient neutrality at 125 years, he says, well, look, if you go back 125 years, Queen Victoria was still sitting on the throne. And if you look at how the world's changed since Victorian times, and how government's changed and how government policy changes, are you really going to be in a position in 125 years' time? So it's all a bit baffling, but I don't care because I won't be here. So we then have a whole heap of legal agreements that we have to go through. So obviously these offsets have to be secured. They turn into some form of legal agreement. We have a new law in place called a conservation covenant, which is the first time we've ever had a positive covenant in UK land law. And they're only just getting off the table, these things. We have things like 106 agreements, which bind the land use for either a period of time or in perpetuity to a way of managing that land for the environment. So this is all new to us, but this structure really sort of sets out how we think we will deliver this. So we are one of DEFRA and Natural England's pilot projects for biodiversity net gain. So we've been working with the government now for 4 years on how that will come to market, testing some of their statutory instruments and some of the, feeding back into the policy. It's been an evolving process. We really see that BNG will be a key part of kind of financing this project. We're also involved with environmental land management, which is this new subsidy regime, not from a point of taking money from the subsidy, but as part of the test and trial process, really kind of testing different methodologies and outcomes. And at the moment, we're just starting one on looking at monitoring and evaluation. So as we deliver this, and then you get an uplift, hopefully, in biodiversity terms, how do you measure that? How do you make that meaningful? How do you make it useful? How do you deploy it at a farm level? How do you get this into the wider countryside? And that's something that we're looking at the moment. We also did one 18 months or so ago, which Jake was part of as well, really looking at this kind of whole new concept of landscape recovery. So how do you bring all of these farmers together to be a bit more strategic, to deliver something a bit more meaningful for nature? We're also testing nutrient neutrality, as we said, so we've got different interventions on there, things for removing nutrients from the wider landscape. So that can be things like treatment wetlands, where you have a series of cells or ponds with different plant assemblages which take out different levels of nutrient. We're affected by nitrates and phosphorus, and there's a couple here in Norfolk already. There's actually 3. There's a good example up on the River Ingle, which is working at the other side of a water recycling centre, which is actually stripping nutrients out before it's going back into the river, and that's kind of working with nature to use those plants. And that's good because it's avoiding pouring cubic meters of concrete and chemical dosing in perpetuity, where they're shipping chemicals in from China to treat this. So using nature to treat that for you is a much more sustainable way of doing that and improve water quality into the river systems. And then carbon, as I say, we don't think we'll trade carbon, but it's really important to understand the impact that we're having on carbon. So as we take some of this land out of production, as we start to transition that landscape to more high distinctiveness habitats, what's that doing in carbon terms? How much carbon is that sequestering? How much does it lock up and store within the soil? As we're planting woodlands and connecting some of these woodland blocks, trees are obviously a great way of sequestering carbon as well. So the project starts to deliver a wider environmental benefits than just the biodiversity piece. So we've done quite a bit on the ground. I think it's just over 200 acres now. Quite a big block of lowland meadow already created. We're using a hand-collected seed mix from Sandringham, working with one of the tenants on Sandringham to do that, because we really want to try and get local provenance, but also really high quality, high distinctiveness into that initial seed bank, because that becomes our donor site as we go forward. And I think we end up with about 600 or 700 acres of lowland meadow within the final kind of project. We've also installed about 20 kilometres of, 25 kilometres it says up there, of chestnut fencing over the last couple of years, and I haven't totted up the eventual length of fencing on the project, but it's probably going to be fairly significant. I'm really wanting to try and get some high quality fencing in there so it lasts the test of time. We don't want to be replacing this fencing every sort of 5 to 10 years because it's breaking down. We're also looking at wetlands, creating sort of this floodplain wetland mosaic. This is a little photo of one of the areas that we've done, where there's about 600 metres of chalk stream creation, where we've re-meandered a really small chalk stream, not the Wendling Beck, but a tiny little stream called the Spring Beck, which has been really successful and created about 16 ponds and scrapes in that landscape as well. So once you get water into the landscape, it's amazing how quickly it starts to regenerate. Some of these drier grasslands are actually much more of a challenge to create and restore, and obviously climate change is having its fair share of impact in that as well. So we put the bulk of the flower seed in autumn 21. We had a killer drought in summer 22, which we still haven't really worked out what the impact of that is going to be, but we spent 40 grand on flower seed in autumn 21, and probably lost maybe 30% of that to the drought. So It's very difficult. Once the grassland's established, it's not too bad because it's seeded. You've got the seed bank, it sort of seeds on the ground. You'll get the stuff from next year coming through. But in that first year, it's really critical. So we're looking at how we can do that, and then things like wet woodland restoration as well. We've restored about 1 hectare of wet woodland where somebody had dried it up basically. So we've re-meandered a stream through the middle of there and re-wetted that woodland. And as we kind of move on, we're just about, if it ever stops raining, it wasn't supposed to rain tonight, but if it ever stops raining, we've got another 25 hectares to drill of this Sandringham lowland meadow mix this year as well, which will then see more fencing come in. We're starting to manage the stuff that we've already done. So generally a kind of a hay cut, so traditional kind of farm system, hay cut, aftermath graze. The heathlands is kind of intensive grazing. We've started to put heather seed in a couple of areas of the heath as well and doing some scrapes. So, and also kind of engaging with the local community to do this. So using volunteers, bringing in, working with charities. So Norfolk Mencap we've been working with, and also corporates. So we did quite a lot with Aviva. We've had Savills out, Chet Pallets. If people want to do kind of corporate away days, that's great for us because it gives us a chunk of manpower that we can put to good use. Savills, we worked really hard. They had woodland clearance for the day and came back completely filthy and sweaty. So this is just a few little photos of the project. This is Dillington Car SSI, which is part of that kind of green space in the middle. So really amazing environment already, and the wider landscape is now kind of working much harder. So you can see a lot of this land here is where the lowland meadow creation has started, and we're kind of learning as we go on the management of that as well. So trying different techniques. We do flail collecting. We've done early haylage cuts, late hay cuts, bringing in livestock at different times, and just trying to figure out what works best and being quite agile with the impact that the weather has on that as well. Jake, that's one for you because you saw the wetland after it was first created, so you can see how that started to kind of regenerate as well. And this huge kind of blackthorn hedge in here with a double fence down either side, so trying to create turtle dove habitat within there as well to give them sort of real scale access to water. And then there's a turtle dove plot over the other side of that, and we also do sort of supplementary feeding and that sort of thing. So trying to pinpoint priority species within that and bring the species into that. And that's actually one of Jake's turtle dove trial plots as well. That was last summer. So we have and again we'll go in. So we've retained some of that. We go into that with a top down, which is a cultivator in the spring, and just create that kind of open structures because turtle doves loves kind of scrabbling around in kind of arable weeds and soil, and which again I never would have known a few years ago because I probably wouldn't have even known what a turtle dove was, to be honest. And this is a cycle path that we've put in, so that's about 2 miles I think of cycle path that links Durham town centre. It's a breeding gravel surface that we've put in there. And this is actually, we've sort of put wildflower seeds down the side of it. We've tried to kind of lay hedges where we can. We've got a hard fence here, but wherever we can, we're trying to lay hedges as a stock boundary. And you can see there's a plum orchard just in there as well, which is still functioning. So we're still picking plums, but they're now in an organic system. We kind of graze in and around them, and they're just sort of central to that kind of lowland meadow area at the moment as well. So as we do all this and we continue to do it, we're really trying to develop a kind of a best-in-class model for how you measure it as well, and how you record exactly what's happening. So we've got these kind of SMART principles, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. I'm really trying to get into this kind of repetition of measuring certain areas at certain times and really trying to record quite high quality data within that, so that we understand what's working, what's not working, and we can start to share that with other projects as well. Really researching the effectiveness of the management techniques and the establishment techniques actually, and sort of adapt this principle of adaptive management. So we're working with nature. We're not 100% sure what it's going to do, what it wants to do. and we can have a little bit of flexibility in that process as we go to ensure that we're kind of delivering the best results for nature as well. Tracking the delivery of biodiversity units and the agreements, and there's just a digital register that Natural England are designing at the moment, which will kind of enable that to be a kind of a public interface as well, so people can see where these offsets have gone, and really understand how scale affects biodiversity as well. So if you deliver a piece of lowland meadow, but it's only a fragmented little parcel of a couple of acres, how does that perform for biodiversity compared to a big chunk of lowland meadow in a broader mosaic of habitats? We think that the big one will be better, but we're not 100% sure. So really trying to monitor this and measure this as we go, because nobody's really ever done this before at this scale across kind of multiple landscapes across the country. And really understand both target species, so turtle doves we mentioned, green-winged orchid. We've just got some really important species coming into the project, even within quite a short space of time, but also undesirable species. So things like Himalayan balsam, bamboo, even ragwort, which is a kind of a controversial one. We don't see it as a big problem weed in itself, but it does really hinder us on one of our principal management techniques, which is a hay cut. So we don't want to allow ragwort to get established into the project, because people don't want hay with ragwort in it, and that becomes that's probably one of our most important management techniques. So we're not overzealous about it, but we just don't want it to really get a big foothold. So we are removing that at the moment, along with sort of various other injurious weeds as well. And also within the biodiversity net gain scoring criteria, we get marked down if we have a high threshold of injurious weeds and thistles and things like that, docks, etc. So this actually penalises us if we have high thresholds of those weeds. But we need to really monitor this and monitor the extent and condition of the habitats as well. So how are they performing? So it's constantly going out and really understanding what we've got on the ground, which species have developed well, which ones are lagging behind, what are we missing completely, what are the reasons for that? Is it soil-based? Is it climate-based? What's going on there? And we're starting to do that now as well. So within biodiversity net gain, we have to hit certain species criteria to hit certain thresholds within that as well. So it's really in our interests. We kind of get marked down if we don't hit those assessments. And really tracking land use management as well. So what seed have we used? What was the sowing density? What was the weather at the time? What was the depth of the seed? Did it get broadcast? Was it drilled? Because if we don't record any of that, we don't have anything robust in terms of data to help other people and help other projects learn in the future. What was the follow-up management? Where are the land parcels? How do you record that? How do you create almost a database for the project to be able to do that? It's storing photos. We're looking at monitoring with bioacoustic monitors. We're working with things like eDNA, which is environmental DNA, and then comparing that to traditional kind of transects and sort of citizen science, and really trying to understand how these technologies work, how effective they are. And as technology moves on, that kind of speeds up that process as well. And then ultimately, did it work? Has it achieved the outcomes that we were hoping for at the beginning? And that's just a kind of an example of the different types of monitoring. So this principle of a bioblitz, where you get loads of people on the ground for a few days and you just measure absolutely everything. The bioacoustic monitors, traditional surveys, quadrats for plants, high resolution satellite images are quite good as well. So some of the AI technology that's being ground truthed at the moment to understand exactly how that works. We're working with a company that can identify the number of species of grass within a square metre of a satellite image. That's quite cutting edge technology. They can't tell you what those species are at the moment, but they can count, or the computer can count how many they are. And things like eDNA, both in soil and water. We're also measuring water quality, and water quantity through real-time measuring as well, because some of those peaks and troughs within the river are really quite frequent. So if you've got somebody going out every 2 weeks or every month taking a water quality sample, chances are they're missing quite a lot of what's happened within that water course. So these are taking readings every 10 seconds and recording that, and that's going back into a kind of a central database. So that's kind of Wendling Beck. It's quite a lot there. We can have questions in a bit and just see if I've completely bamboozled you, or that's great, and it will deliver a big chunk of habitat around Durham, but it doesn't really change the world. It doesn't reverse biodiversity loss or help climate change on its own. But actually, some of that thinking, some of the finance models, some of the methodologies for measuring and that sort of thing within there are useful for other people, and that's kind of the phase that we're entering at the moment, is taking this out to the wider landscape. So we're working with a group of other projects. There's actually one quite close to here at Crown Point, just south of Norwich, and farmer clusters and landscape recovery projects. So landscape recovery is the top tier of this ELM scheme, this environmental land management scheme, and that's really looking to bring collaborations of farmers together to do more for nature. And there's actually quite a lot in Norfolk. So there's already 2 round 1 projects that are off the ground. So there's a big one in the Brecks, which is about 33,000 hectares, big chunk of land, some big estates in there as well, and they're trialling how they can create kind of nature corridors and islands of habitat through a predominantly farmed landscape. They're also restoring 5 chalk rivers within the Brecks national character area as well. We're working on one on the Ouse Washes, which goes from St Ives in Cambridgeshire all the way through to Denver and up to Downham Market, which is this big, long, thin project here, which has got all sorts of different stuff in it. So it's the Ouse, the River Ouse is quite an important set of habitats within its own right. The washes are really important for wildlife, suffer with their fair share of summer flooding, where you've got lots of ground nesting birds. Jake will be well aware of that from his work. And actually that's the RSPB that are the lead applicant on that. So we've been working with those, that team and bringing those landowners together. And my brother's actually one of the farmers in the St Ives area of that project as well. You've got organisations like Alban Wise, are a big farming company up towards Downham Market that are currently doing about 200 hectares of re-wetting peat, part of the Peatland Discovery Grant alongside Norfolk Wildlife Trust. So there's some really interesting organisations looking at this. There's a project in West Norfolk, which is Gayton and Westacre, and about 18 farmers around there. One up on the northwest Norfolk coast, which is about 14 landowners around that area. Really ambitious project, about 11,000 hectares. The Wensum Farmers, which is a farm cluster of which Wendling Beck is a part as well, which are looking at that kind of Wensum corridor, which ultimately has quite a big impact on the Yare and the land around here. And there's already around 1 project on the North Norfolk coast as well, which is Holcombe, looking at a whole series of river restorations, including the River Stiffkey, and then sort of emerging projects as well. And we're looking at one at John Clare Country, which is Burley House and Milton and some big estates around there, and then one up in Lincolnshire. So this is starting to develop a bit more of a strategic picture around the region, and this starts to form part of government's thinking, which is this principle of nature recovery networks. So there's something coming through the planning system at the moment called local nature recovery strategies, which is a kind of strategic view of where some of this habitat restoration and creation should happen, and the planning system can start to dictate where that happens through policies like biodiversity net gain. So what we've done for government and DEFRA here is, if not all of these are confirmed, the 2 white ones are. There's actually one down here on the Waveney and Little Ouse as well. But some of these emerging projects, if these get supported in the future, it starts to create this principle of a nature recovery network for pretty much the whole of the eastern region, which, when you're looking at things on that scale, there's hundreds of thousands of acres of land And it's not all coming out of production. Some of it is maintaining production, but doing these kind of corridors and linkages and this principle of kind of functionally linked landscapes. It starts to do much more for nature, and some of the existing sites like Wick and Fen and the WWT site up on the Washes, bring in more space and more impact for nature within there as well. So that was quite a lot. I need a drink. Hopefully it kind of made sense to everybody. It's kind of working in the right direction and hopefully doing the right thing for wider society. And yeah, so do any questions, I guess?
Yeah, well, you have a drink. Thank you very much, Glenn, for giving us that run through. And now we've got plenty of time for questions. If anyone wants to ask anything. Jim?
Yeah, I'll ask one. Thanks, Glenn, that was really interesting. You mentioned early on in the talk that this is not rewilding. And I suppose that's become quite a bastardised term, isn't it, already, with its short existence. At the conception of this project, was there ever debate about which direction to go? You've gone down to a very legal and compliant route, very carefully managed conservation. Was rewilding ever on the table here? Was it a case of, we could fly in Derek Gow with a couple of beaver and it goes wild? Was that never really up for debate? This was always the way you were going to go, because you've got, the likes of, obviously nationally, NEP, and more locally, Summer Leighton, as these kind of standout rewilding projects, and this is not that.
No,
was
it's
that
not
ever on the table?
I'm not sure it really was, because we really started at the early days of biodiversity net gain, and it was quite apparent to us that rewilding it's not completely incompatible, but it's a challenge with biodiversity net gain, because you're setting out to meet specific types of habitat to a specific condition within that set amount of time. And rewilding is non-intervention. You walk away, there might be a bit of livestock management, but you really let nature do what nature wants to do. We see that rewilding kind of exists on a spectrum, and I think if you talk to somebody like Rewilding Britain, they'd probably agree with this, that Wendling Beck is a wilder landscape, or will be a wilder landscape. It's not non-intervention, but it still probably exists on that spectrum somewhere. We don't really have anywhere in the UK which is a proper wild landscape. We don't have wilderness left anymore. You don't have apex predators. So even NEP, which is 3,500 acres of rewilding in inverted commas, or wilding as they call it, they're still managing the livestock. There is still an element of intervention within there. It's not until you really go to, some really far-flung Alaska and places like that you really get sort of true wilderness where natural systems kind of exist on their own. So even kind of Yellowstone is sort of semi-managed with some of the species that they've reintroduced there. So I think it's got its place. I mean, we're not going to preach to anyone. We don't think anything's wrong or anything's right. There's a place for intensive food production on certain parcels of land. If people want to do wilding, great. It's a great contribution to nature. This kind of just fits the bit that we want to do, and it enables us to have a business model that exists there as well. I mean, we're fortunate in the region now. As you say, we've got Summer Leighton, you've got Ken Hill, Nattergal, which is a kind of a spin out of NEP, have acquired a site at High Fen, which is part of that Ooze Washes project as well. So there is quite a lot happening for in the rewilding space, but those projects are still learning as they go as well. A lot, NEP is an ecotourism business model, if they're totally honest. So the kind of rewilding is a brings people into that kind of ecotourism model, and which is fine. I mean, land has a massive capital value, and you've got to you've got to repay some of that capital investment in some way. So if you're not going to do it through farming it, and that becomes difficult when you're on marginal land, then we need to find another way to do it. It's another diversification. if that's improving the environment and biodiversity and benefiting wider society as part of that process, then it's probably not a bad place to be, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to thank you for your talk. I thought you gave an excellent talk, and the foundation you've laid legally, and to have the inclusion of graduates and students from the UEA and the participation of John Ennis. I think you will learn and know almost now where you're starting, and you'll be able to see what the impact of your management policies are. I think that's really outstanding. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
What I was going to ask you is, recently I saw the photographic exhibition at the Natural History Museum in London, and beside all these remarkable pictures was a little outline of what we're looking at, what the prospects of these insects and these mammals were. And the common theme throughout was a loss of habitat, a loss of food, and sometimes 18–90% reduction in population, from even as recently as 25 or 30 years ago. And leading on from that, we know what we're doing. We know where the damage is coming from. And if we indiscriminately spray the foundation for all our nature, we're spraying insects, spraying masses of nitrogen, masses of phosphates, when all the natural processes would give us enough, which may be even 5 kilograms per hectare of potassium or phosphates or whatever it is, and we are drenching it. And the consequence of killing your insects is reaching all our wildlife.
Yeah.
And why, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, no, it's
Because there must be an alternative.
the part of the issue. I can say this because I'm a farmer, and we're still farming quite a bit of that landscape and still doing things that we know we shouldn't be doing, but it's very difficult to get out of that cycle, and I think farming as it's intensified has become much more reliant on that kind of big ag, if you will. So you have an agronomist probably supplied by the chemical company that's gradually the amounts of chemical that are going on and the numbers of passes gradually creep up every year. I mean, if I think back on the fungicides, 2012 was a wet year when nobody ever used to put a T0 fungicide on, which is why it's now 0 and not 1. And that was the first year that ever came in, but it's stuck. And now every year people are putting a T0 fungicide on for no apparent reason, because not every year is going to be that wet. But it was they're hooked into this system of, and a lot of farmers, and probably myself included, don't know exactly what you need. You're reliant on that kind of expertise to tell you what you need to spray and when you need to spray it and everything else. But it's effectively a license to print money, because we're just told to get on and do it. And I think there is quite a lot of that still happens in the process, and it all comes in big plastic thick containers, which just get, they in theory get recycled, but the supply chain, the entire supply chain is so unenvironmentally friendly. And that's kind of been an eye-opener for us, I think, even on the bits that we're still farming, is just how kind of thoughtless the whole process is.
Each of these bags carries 600 kilograms of agrochemicals, and it's drenched. But the consequence of that is to undermine all the mycorrhiza, all the fungi, all the archaea, and all the little insects and the grubs.
Yeah.
I think it's quite terrifying. And you see sheds with 100 bags, 200 bags.
Yeah, so we're kind of learning this particularly on the blackcurrants. So the blackcurrants, as they transition over to that regen system, is a soil food web methodology. So it's really working with the soil to understand the microbacteria and all of the life and everything that's going on in the soil. And it's pretty lifeless at the moment. So we have to kind of start to build that back up over time, and that doesn't just happen overnight. It's taking a huge amount of effort. So we're composting. It goes on as a tea and a drench, full of bacteria. So not in the compost that we think of as a kind of a solid, but actually just putting billions of bacteria back into the soil, because that over chemicalization of farming it for the last however many years has basically destroyed most of that life in the soil. So the only way that you can achieve yields going forward is to continually put on synthetics, which is where most farm systems are. So it is an eye-opener, but it's very different. You know, I've got nothing, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And I think there's a big chunk of the industry that probably it's almost impossible to try and get out of that cycle without, and you're in a constant high pressure system within farming as well. So you've got to get drilled, you've got to get harvested, you've got to get sprayed. You don't have time to sort of sit back and think, actually, I want to reinvent my business and I'm going to go organic or I'm going to go regen, because the results of that are quite painful as well. So to come out of that kind of high dependency system, there's not too many farms that can actually deal with the yield loss in the first few years as part of that. So it's not for the faint-hearted. It's very difficult, and that's probably where we need to support people going forward. Is how do you change this system? I don't, you know, from the projects that we're working on, there's no lack of will amongst the landowners. They would like to do something different. They think most farmers are very appreciative of nature and, you know, would never willfully kind of destroy nature. But it's just difficult to get out of that existing system.
The transition is, the implications of that are very dramatic for your bank balance and the whole balance of the farm.
Yeah.
I was surprised in what I read about NEP is how the microbiota in the soils, how relatively quickly they reappear. And that, I mean, by even a short period as 4 years.
They're on heavy clay there, though, aren't they? So
They are on heavy clay, yeah. But it's tricky on sand.
yeah.
And they stop cropping, don't they? They stop cropping, don't they, on that?
Yeah.
I've got one very short question, which is how many acres does this whole project cover? And one very long question, which is what is a bio credit and
Okay.
what does it mean?
Okay. Okay. So the project is 2,000 acres.
2,000?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the whole project area, and that's as big as we can get, basically, because that's the only land that we've got. A biodiversity unit is an uplift in biodiversity. So if you take a baseline assessment, there's a metric which classifies the existing habitat. So arable would be 2 units per hectare, for example. If you take that arable land to something like Lowland Meadow, there's going to be an uplift in the biodiversity value of that the metric determines. So this is a DEFRA metric, and that for Lowland, from arable to Lowland Meadow, is going to be an increase of about 6 or 7 units per hectare. Other habitats will have different amounts. So neutral grassland would be less. You know, woodland is less still. It doesn't perform terribly well, but that creates a unit. And as the developers are losing habitat, so if they're taking a piece of arable land and turning it into a housing estate, they'll lose 2 units per hectare. So the idea is that they can offset that biodiversity loss within the footprint of the development site. So that's the metric kind of tries to get the offset as close to the development site as possible. It doesn't have to be a housing estate. It could be a quarry, it could be a road or whatever. And it can be things like bat boxes and hedgehog holes and that sort of stuff. All of those things within those developments actually give them a score. But anything that they can't offset within the development site, they can either save a piece of land close to the development site and do something like this and create some habitat, or they can just buy a unit from something like this where we're creating units and say, okay, we're going to, you know, we need, but they can't, the clever bit of this is they don't get planning permission until they've shown the offset. So there's quite a big lever there. And so this comes into force in probably the end of January is when it will be.
So ordinary
mandatory.
farmland then, with a field of barley, is about as low as you can get on the bio credits.
Pretty much, yeah. But that in some ways that's good for the landowner because it gives them a low baseline to be able to uplift, which is what, So, but not always. So the grass margins will have a slightly higher starting score. Woodland has a higher starting score. So and not all of it is terribly. The river stuff is pretty complicated and quite expensive, but. Yeah, and it's a learning curve, and it won't be perfect. Day one, it's never going to be perfect, but we expect it to evolve over time. It doesn't have to be perfect day one.
One-off payment, or is it an ongoing payment?
It's a one-off payment, and it's paid up front. So, and the numbers are quite big. You'll probably see some slightly erratic reporting when it first comes out because the numbers look big, but then they have to last for 30 years. And you've got to try and factor inflation into that as well. And you've got legal agreements, and you've got major tax headaches with this as well, loss of inheritance tax relief and all sorts of other things that the government haven't quite clarified yet. So we're trying to get lobby government to get the tax system aligned because we feel it's unfair that if you're a farmer that's not necessarily farming in a very environmentally way, you benefit from having inheritance tax relief on that land as being an active farmer. If you put it into conservation, it's not clear whether you would lose that inheritance tax relief as part of putting it in. And our view is you shouldn't really be penalised for trying to do something which is good in inverted commas. But we haven't, they have had a tax consultation which closed about 4 months ago. There was an email came out yesterday from Treasury to say they needed more time we thought we might get something in the autumn statement. And that will encourage landowners that's one of the biggest barriers at the moment. But government also have a challenge because there's a challenge with money and how affordable, you've seen this stuff, rolling back net zero and all that sort of stuff. How affordable is this net zero pledge and how affordable is, because there's a cost of living crisis and so actually bringing private money into that is really important in that respect. You need to try and lever some of this private money into the system to be able to pay for it because the government can't afford to bail us all out to get us back on track. But it's pretty short-sighted in our view to just say, well, it's not really convenient and we can't really afford it, so we'll tackle it at some point in the future because it'll be too late. You've already missing tipping points around sea level rise. We all see erratic weather patterns. It's either monsoon or it's a drought or it's 40 degrees or whatever it is. Weather wasn't like this, and last year was the warmest year on record. And actually, there's a financial incentive to do this because it's all about our natural capital, and the natural capital being all of the things that nature gives us for free, whether that be timber or carbon or whatever it might be, water, and something like 50% of global GDP is highly dependent on nature. So that equates to about $44 trillion, which is quite a big number. Now, as a species, we're eroding that natural capital. Someone described it really neatly the other day as we're eating our own platform on which we're standing much faster than nature can replenish itself. And it doesn't take a genius to work out that that is not sustainable in the long term. And what happens when those resources get squeezed is society starts to break down. You get war, you get northward migration from climate change. These things cost a lot of money. People's houses flooding costs a lot of money. People dying from drought and extreme heat and everything else is not the way that we should be living. So we need to tackle the underlying root causes of this, and a lot of it is arguably too late, but we need to try and do this as urgently as we can to try and reset that balance, in our opinion, but other people maybe not agree. But
just a quick question, and I may have misunderstood this, but do you have any say in which developers you work with to restore biodiversity net gain? For instance, can you choose to go with a good guy who's got lots of mitigation in place, as opposed to somebody who's totally going to blitz?
Yeah, that's a
build
good.
lots of houses.
It's a good question. Yeah, you can. So it's a private market, so you can decide who you transact with, and it's up to you whether you want to sell to somebody or you tell them to get stuff because you don't like the development or whatever it is. And this is one of the challenges that the NGOs have with biodiversity net gain. So a lot of the NGOs sit on think of RSPB or the Wildlife Trust or whoever it might be, National Trust. They're concerned about that reputational risk. So if it's a controversial development, so the great example in Norfolk is the Western Link. Do you want to be associated with allowing that project to happen? I don't know really exactly where we sit on this, and we haven't really been tested on it, but we're not part of the planning system. We don't, enabling that biodiversity offset to happen doesn't enable the planning to happen. It's part of the process, but the planning decision is made on other factors. So Western Link's a good example. If that's going to get approved, then our view is that if you were an NGO or a wildlife trust or whoever, then you've already objected to it. You've made it quite clear that it shouldn't happen. But if the planners decide that it's going to happen, then surely that's an opportunity to make sure that the best possible offset happens in its place, and that it's done to the very best that you can do it. So you make the best of a bad lot, basically. So that's the kind of the pragmatic way of looking at it. But yeah, you don't have to. You do know who you're selling to, and if you don't like them, you don't have to sell to them.
That's fair enough. Thank you.
I've got 3 questions.
God, well, you're only allowed one, so choose carefully.
Hopefully something. Chestnut fencing just because it looks lovely, or does something else?
We think it probably lasts longer.
Okay.
So yeah.
Will hedgerow grow around it as well? Or?
Yeah. So it comes from Kent as well, so it's arguably a bit more sustainable. It's not full of preservatives, which most of the other timber is, and the Forestry Commission have been using it for quite some time, and I've heard mixed reports, but generally, my experience is that the chestnut, I'm a 5th generation farmer originally from Cambridgeshire, and could always remember as a boy, because my dad's fencing was appalling and the sheep all used to get out and what have you, but you used to get these chestnut posts that had been there for donkey's years, and they'd kind of silvered down and just hard as nails and never really used to rot off, and it is that kind of, whereas the softwood is grown so quickly, it's kiln dried, it just doesn't last, and even when it's soaked full of preservatives. So it's not actually that much of an increase in cost to put it into chestnut, which is a hardwood. It's really quite sustainable because a lot of it's from coppice as well. So so it's partly environmental, partly because it looks much nicer, in my opinion, and it's more enduring, and it's
local industries, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question then is, what really exciting species have rocked up, or ones that you've been excited by?
So nothing off the scale, but we have got a nesting pair of goshawks, which we think is quite cool.
Pretty good.
That have come in since we've been doing, because we started all of the surveys right at the beginning of the process, so we had a pretty good idea of what was there already. The plant species that we've put in, and again, I'm not an ecologist, so I'm on slightly dodgy ground here, but most of those species have come in that lowland meadow mix, and there's some quite nice things in there, which are on that kind of indicator species list for lowland meadow, which obviously were never there before. We've planted them, so obviously they're bound to be there, but you're not guaranteed that. We've got things like nesting great white egrets and that sort of thing, which are, I wouldn't say that they weren't there before, but they're more abundant now. And I think that's one thing that we're seeing is the abundance in species. So something like skylark, for example, on the areas that we've done are much more abundant. And we've got the bioacoustic monitors there that are listening all the time. And scientifically, you could probably pull holes in some of that data, but anecdotally, there's about 5 times as many bird species in the new areas of habitat creation as there is in the arable control point. So we're measuring the arable fields as well. And you can just see, you don't have to be a genius to look at a graph and say, well, there's a lot more in that field. Where's that monitor? Oh, it's in one of the new meadow areas. And where's that one? There's hardly anything in there. And that's, yeah. And we're ground truthing that with kind of manual surveys. And there's some quite interesting, don't ask me to name them, but there's some really quite interesting moths and, flies and things like that, which get certain people quite excited. We saw a pair this summer, and that, to be fair, that's the first time we've seen turtle doves for years. But then we haven't really been looking, if we're honest. And one of my greatest regrets is we haven't got an acoustic monitor where the turtle doves plots are. So we are looking at that this year. I mean, Jake will tell you, they're fairly. They make rubbish nests, so it's partly their own fault, but they are fairly well persecuted in other parts of the world as well. So yeah, we're trying to do our bit with habitat. But actually that habitat that you create for the turtle doves has multiple co-benefits as well. So for pollinators and everything else, there's lots of other good stuff. There's some quite interesting butterflies and that sort of thing as well. So lots of people if the ecologists get excited, then I know that we're doing something right. So
my last question, having met the 4 landowners involved, sort of you and Rosie, you had different reasons for wanting to do this. Are the other 2 landowners getting as excited about all of these changes as you guys, I assume, are, or are they still a bit sceptical?
No, they have been quite sceptical, but they're coming round. So they're completely on board now, and I think they are getting excited. We now get texts from them saying, look at this and look at that, and and sending us information on the WhatsApp and that sort of thing. So I think they've really come a long way.
Joy coming through from
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
so as a lifestyle thing, can you see more farmers kind of getting attracted to this way of doing things?
Yeah, I think I can. I don't think it's for everybody. I think, and we're not going to sit here and preach to anybody else that you should do this and you shouldn't do that. But if people are wanting to do something different, or they're on marginal land and they're struggling and they quite want to do this, then we'll help them do it. But ultimately, it's horses for courses. If you want to carry on farming like you are, that's absolutely fine as well. There's nothing wrong with that.
Get paid £1.5 million to just selling pigs.
Well, they weren't. Yeah, someone else's pigs actually. But yeah, I mean, there's
not you.
no.
It's over 80 years, though, isn't it? It's over 80 years that.
Yeah, and it's and I mean, if you'd ever driven past them, there should never have been pigs on that land. So if one of the ways to ensure that there's never going to be pigs on that land is to pay the landowner to do that and put it into a covenant, then fine. I mean, there's maybe some holes in that policy where they can probably just move down the road or whatever it is. But they were in a particularly, and we had outdoor pigs for 23 years on my farm, so I know exactly what it's like. And actually, to be fair, the pig industry has done quite a lot in recent years to, a lot of them are now grassed over. They've started rebringing the noses to ensure that green cover stays and you're not getting that amount of runoff. So you will go past some pig farms that are really quite good, but there are some very bad outdoor pig units from a...
It rings to their noses so they can't do their natural behaviour, so that's controversial.
It is controversial, yeah, but I guess you can't. You either have a very muddy pig field or a potential issue with. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a pig farmer, so I can just. And I'm being recorded as well, so I'll quickly sidestep that one. But
I just wondered if you could share with us maybe a couple of your highlight nature experiences this year.
Highlight nature experiences. So I think the goshawks for me were probably one, because I've always had a soft spot for them, and I think if I could have chosen any one bird species to come into the project, it would have been the goshawks. But they're actually doing an amazing job of clearing the grey squirrels out of the woodland. Yeah, there is a carpet of squirrel tails under the which is, yeah, so that's been
Something for the gift shop.
yeah, we could turn them into key rings or something, but so that's, I mean, yeah, so starting to understand those kind of natural processes has been quite good. I think probably yeah, we had a royal visit earlier in the year, so that suggested that we were doing something right, so that was quite nice. And just being invited to help other people, I think, is a kind of recognition of what we're doing, and we work, you know, we're sort of really privileged to work on some really cool projects and talk to some really inspirational people as well, which we never would have been in that sphere of influence, if you like. So that's probably been the personal highlight, is actually just, you know, I think I'm going to NEP on Monday. I was in St John's College last night. It's, you know, they're inviting us in to come and talk to them about these kind of things, and yeah, that's
Nice to know we're in such good company then.
yeah, and obviously coming here, which was my personal highlight of the year. But yeah, I don't know if there's other, you know, just seeing some life back in the countryside as well. So actually just seeing some cattle go back onto land that probably hasn't seen cows for 150 years is quite cool, and just seeing that landscape come to life, I think that's been quite a highlight for me. You know, something about livestock in a landscape which just livens the whole thing up, and then all of the natural processes start working, and yeah.
Says something that you consider egrets as not sort of noteworthy particularly anymore. You just mentioned in passing, but
yeah, well, I guess we're kind of used to seeing them now, but yeah. And to have them nesting there as well is quite nice.
You mentioned great white.
Yeah. We've got little egrets as well, but yeah, I mean the great white 20, 30 years ago would have been exceptional, whereas now it's kind of like still nice.
In the countryside as you're going past.
Yeah.
Drive over the Trav bypass.
Yeah.
There's white speck in the floodplain, and you know what it is immediately.
Yeah, and just things, I mean, snipe and things like that just you never would have seen them. It just you know, not in my time, it just wouldn't have happened. And in places, I think that's been one of the things as well, that you see stuff in places that you just wouldn't expect to see it, and that tends to suggest, and it's the abundance as well, so it's not necessarily individual amazing species, but just these flocks of kind of small finches, whereas that's really noticeable. You would have maybe had a flock of 10 or 15, but now we're getting sort of hundreds of these, you know, finch flocks around, that you just think, wow, that's quite different. So.
Can I just ask, do you have any additional plans for public access? Obviously, you've got the cycleway.
Yeah, so the cycleway's gone in. We're kind of trying to enhance existing access as much as we can as well, particularly for kind of all ability access as well. So we're trying to make it as inclusive as possible. There are a couple of areas that we're looking at for new access routes as well. We have this kind of constant tension with biodiversity and people, and there are some areas there that you just don't want people going through for obvious reasons. But
It'd just be nice to think that it was, you know, free access, as in footpath, rather than
you can't go here and you can't go there. Yeah.
You may find in other.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, there is parts of society that are maybe not as thoughtful as others that tend to kind of spoil it for other people, because that's, you know, that recreational pressure is a real problem.
I can see
And actually, that's another reason for kind of trying to deliver at scale as well, and from a predator point of view as well. So you can say, look, you know, there's predators within the landscape for ground nesting birds and things like that, but once you grow that scale, that predator pressure dissipates slightly and gives species a little bit more chance. And I guess it's the same with people and dog walkers and that sort of thing as well. But yeah, there's some big chunks of land there that we wouldn't really want to open up. But where we can, we will look at access, and that we've created some permissive routes and things like that as well, away from the kind of the trouble is they tend to be away from the bits that you really want to see, sort of thing. But we are putting a bird hide into the other side of the museum site. So there'll be 2 bridges that actually cross the Wendling Beck River as part of the development for the museum, and that will allow a little bit of access into the periphery of the SSSI. We have to be a bit careful about how we do that for obvious reasons, but we'll stop that with a bird hide. So there's some amazing, you've seen them, Jake, there's some amazing lakes there that people never would have ever been able to see, whereas now if you're keen on that sort of thing, you can actually go and set up in a hide and go and watch that sort of thing. So yeah, we're trying to balance things as best we can, basically.
Well, thank you very much, Glenn. Really appreciate you coming and telling us all about Wendling Beck.
Thank you for having me.
Later about whether we can arrange a trip.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No problem.
En masse as a group. Yeah, really appreciate it. And thank you.
Anybody think it's not a good thing? No? Everyone's happy with that?